Hi, welcome to Project Geospatial. Here with me for a special interview is Catherine Nakalembe, program lead for the NASA Harvest Africa program. Catherine, can you formally introduce yourself and give us an overview of what the NASA Harvest Africa program is and the fascinating projects you're working on?
Hi, thanks for having me. My name is Catherine Nakalembe. I'm from the University of Maryland, and I work with the NASA Harvest program. It's NASA's agriculture food security program with the focus of enabling and advancing the use of Earth observations by domestic and international organizations, including public and private organizations, to benefit food security in agriculture and primarily to support agriculture monitoring. The NASA Harvest as a program is focused on developing end-user-driven activities and research, and we currently have over 29 activities and projects working at field to global scales. And NASA Harvest is NASA's contribution to what's called GeoGLAM, which is the Group on Earth Observations Global Agriculture Monitoring Initiatives. And it was launched in 2017. And in the first few years, there's been a big focus on supporting these activities in sub-Saharan Africa, primarily starting in Eastern Africa. And my role in the program has been supporting and working with national ministries and regional agencies within sub-Saharan Africa to take advantage of the advances in satellite and remote sensing technology for developing their own agriculture monitoring programs. Our work sort of started within Eastern Africa. We started working in Tanzania around 2014. And it was building on this GeoGLAM program activity, which is basically initially focusing on developing what's called the Crop Monitor Initiative. It's the sort of one of the flagship activities of GeoGLAM. And the Crop Monitor Initiative, basically, we have this GIS-based online system that enables any organization to really take advantage of accessing remote sensing information as a basis for doing their own agriculture monitoring, and then build in all the additional data sets that it would typically use for their own typical monitoring, and be able to make assessments on a monthly basis. And so the way we started that is we also supported the countries in using and accessing near real-time remote sensing data, for example, from the MODIS satellite, through this GLAM portal. So GLAM is the Global Agriculture Monitoring portal, which enables pretty much anyone in the world to look at time series of MODIS satellite data, particularly MODIS and DVI, looking at anomalies, looking at trends in the past, and try and understand what that means for current conditions. And so the Crop Monitor Initiative is sort of set up in a way where we can say 4 different levels, where we have a global crop monitor for AMIS, which focuses on bigger producer countries, including the US, Argentina, Brazil, Russia, in Africa, also including South Africa. So these countries' agricultural production has significance in terms of the global market for example, grain crops like corn and wheat. But also it's set up in a way where you have international contributors from agencies, official representatives of agencies like the equivalent of the USDA, making assessments with the basis of remote sensing every month, and then they agree and come up with a consensus on what is actually happening in terms of crop conditions. And the consensus is the product is a very simple, very consumable, digestible product that you understand, where areas are red, things are bad, where things are yellow, things might be bad could get better. And we have these sort of conditions, we call them conditions that range from failure to exceptional. And so building into the crop monitor for MS, recognizing that, yes, now we can probably have a good idea about what's happening in terms of production in bigger producer countries. There's a gap in terms of what is being done in terms of monitoring crop conditions within countries that are at risk of food insecurity. And that led to the development of the crop monitor for early warning. Fast forward, the crop monitor for early warning has a strong emphasis and support from the international community, where we have agencies like the UN, FAO, and World Food Program. FAO is the Food and Agriculture Organization of the UN, the World Food Program of the UN. We have the Joint Research Commission of the European Union, FuseNet. They make assessments on a monthly basis and also produce information about conditions in countries that are at risk of food insecurity. So then you have these two systems, and they come together to give you an overview of what's happening in terms of crop conditions. And then what ended up happening then, that sort of identified the gap where we're lacking information that is coming from national governments. And it kind of made sense, national governments, particularly in countries that are at risk of food insecurity, and also countries that are not taking advantage of remote sensing technology for their own assessments. And so what we ended up doing then was developing and customizing the crop monitors into national level systems that then later on was also adapted into what's called a regional crop monitor for Eastern Africa. And so we have active crop monitor portals, if you want to call it that, in Kenya, Tanzania, Uganda, Rwanda, Mali, and there's one that's been in development for Vietnam as well. And the idea is to get the tools and technology and the data in the hands of agencies that are responsible for agriculture monitoring and food security monitoring in these different countries to make and use the tools for their own reporting. And that's led to the establishment of sort of systems that are kind of run on their own, where each country has adopted the crop monitor as an interface to make and support its own monitoring, but then also be able to report continuously. So the one, for example, for Uganda that is hosted in the ministry, in the office of the Prime Minister, has been basically operational since, I think, about January 2015. They've been reporting consistently, monthly since 2015. And that led to them integrating some of the data and the tools that were used in setting up this process for their own national program focusing on disaster risk financing. So they use the GLAM system to access NDVI data, analyze what's happening in the region, in the pilot region, which is called Karamoja, to make sort of figure out what's happening when it comes to relating to food security in the Karamoja region. Maybe I'll pause, and I don't know if I said too much, but I can sort of show you later on sort of what the graphics look like at the different scales, coming from the crop assessments for AMIS, focusing on the bigger producer countries, the crop assessments for early warning, focusing on countries that are at risk of food insecurity, going down all the way to the national level and how the countries have adopted those systems. But I mean, clearly, maybe just to sort of clearly the basis of all of this when it comes to monitoring agriculture and food security is that information and data should form the backbone of the monitoring and reporting. Some countries do not have existing functional agriculture monitoring systems, and a lot of them have huge data gaps. The resources that are required sometimes are just too much for the government to be able to do it consistently and continuously, and they oftentimes take advantage for when there's a project and then they improve something. But there isn't consistency because sometimes things stop. Sometimes the projects are focused on a small region. And so through the NASA Harvest program, the Severe program, for example, helped set up the crop monitor for Kenya. We've been able to sort of support food security in agriculture monitoring by improving the timeliness and the quantitativeness of the data that are being used. So rather than countries continue to make their own decisions on agriculture monitoring without any quantitative data, this has changed where countries are now more and more integrating and using remote sensing information, which gives them national level data that can be, scaled at different levels for them to understand what's actually happening. And I'll pause for now.
Well, let me kind of back up here. You said quite a lot as a great introduction to what you're doing, and tremendous amounts of detail and a lot to talk about. So first off, I want to kind of back up for a second. You mentioned that the MODIS satellite system has been used tremendously through the projects. Just to give a little bit of enlightenment on MODIS itself, so MODIS takes imagery in 36 spectral bands, and I'm sure it's that diversity and spectral bands that gives you a lot of power behind monitoring crops and agriculture in the area. Can you tell us a little bit more about the benefits of using MODIS and maybe what other sensors you take advantage of too?
So the biggest, I think, for me personally, and I guess for people in the community, the biggest push and the biggest contribution of the MODIS satellite right now is that we have continuous data for the last, we're in 2020, so be about 20 years consistently of MODIS data. So we have a long, dense time record. This is really important for when you're monitoring. Monitoring means like, how are things looking right now compared to what they typically are, and how are they likely to unfold? If you don't have a historical record, if you don't have a way to compare and understand what's happened in the past and that what that might mean for production, there's no way to make those types of assessments. So MODIS is enabling us to view the world daily, because there's the MODIS between Aqua and the Aqua and Terra sensors. We have daily data for the whole planet, and then we use composites from MODIS. So we use 8-day and 16-day composites when it comes to agriculture. Not much changes on a daily basis in a lot of places when it comes to crops. So crops don't grow, significantly every day. And so when you start to look at 8-day data, you start to see changes. And for example, the greenness over a long time. And then 16-day, you get a lot more information between, every 16 days, a crop like corn, which is typically harvested within 3 months, you have, sort of a clear trend in terms of greenness. And the NDVI data, 20 years of NDVI data gives you a point of reference for over 16 years. When there was a drought year, you can say that, especially in areas where we don't have any data whatsoever, it becomes really important that you can look at what the MODIS NDVI curve looked like in 2017, for example, and how does now compare to that. You can combine it with other data sets, of course, rainfall and temperature and soil moisture, and then you're much better able to really give a clear picture about what's happening with crops. And for me, that is really important for monitoring agriculture. The other thing is, of course, that it's timely and it's objective. So I cannot personally change what the satellite data says. I can only report on what it says, and that creates a standard for what everybody's using. Well, this has become really reliable, and it's been around a lot longer, maybe 10 times longer than it was anticipated to be. And there's a follow-on sensor, VIRS, which is already has been sending data. And the idea will be in the end that we'll combine the MODIS and the VS data records to continue MODIS's data, record. The other sensors, of course, Landsat has been critical, especially for learning about crop and agriculture monitoring. The USDA has been using it for a long time. It's a higher resolution data set. Of course, the Sentinels, Sentinel-1, Sentinel-2 sensors have also really significantly changed at the level at which we can look at crops across the globe. Combining that higher resolution data set with the time series, the long dense time series for MODIS, we're much able to, when you're looking at smallholder agriculture, get more granular data about what's going on.
When you say high resolution data, what kinds of data are you looking at? Are you talking about commercial imagery from different providers?
So when it comes to when you compare MODIS and Sentinel-2, Sentinel-2 data is much higher resolution. So you can get 10 meter, you can get 10 meter resolution data. So it's not very high resolution. In that case, I would have said very high resolution. With the VHR, we typically refer to it as VHR, because that's then you're talking about the Planet Labs or Worldview 2, MAXA data. And that is, of course, I was going to say for smallholder agriculture, that data actually becomes really critical because we have very, very small fields that are mixed. They have so many different crops. But in an operations sense, you're looking at, huge investments to be able to get data to give you a good time series product, to be able to give you a consistent cropland product for a large country. Even if it's a small country, you're looking at, hundreds of thousands of dollars in order to be able to come up with for example, if you wanted an in-season crop map for one country, it would be really, really expensive. And so we're trying to leverage MODIS's long dense time series, including the fact that it's free, accessible to everybody, improve resolutions through using Landsat data, whereby we get much higher resolution, for example, data. And one of the things that it can contribute to is getting very high resolution crop land masks or crop type masks, and then use those to look at time series for conditions within areas that we find are classified as cropland or crop specific. But even at Sentinel-2 scale, in some places it doesn't actually work. So you find that you need to have like a blend methodology. And through the GeoGlam initiative, what we're trying to do generally is work with everybody in the community. So we have NASA, ESA, we have private companies, you have national governments, national agencies like the USDA or the equivalent in other countries, be able to access more and more technology. So coming up with agreements with private companies that can enable fill these huge data gaps and then help further leverage or take advantage of what the freely accessible data are offering. And in the end, of course, it becomes a mishmash of you have a crop mask from much higher resolution satellite combined with MODIS, long, dense time record, and then you're able to talk about things over time. And then, of course, through partnerships with national agencies trying to access yield information that then can be used for further training of algorithms to be able to derive things like yield or production from satellites. It's much easier in bigger producer countries that have consistent long dense records, but also have bigger fields that you can monitor with Landsat and MODIS, and you cannot do that kind of stuff sometimes in countries where fields are a lot smaller.
Awesome. No, thanks for that rundown. You mentioned a lot about MODIS, and I was always curious about the other providers on how accessible is some of the commercial imagery. You mentioned how expensive it is. Is it easy to obtain for you, some of the either MAXA or Planet Labs products?
So, I mean, I guess you could say it's easier because, first of all, I know that it exists in most countries. Most people don't know that those data exist. It's easier too because of through GeoGlam. The GeoGlam is trying to really, help with negotiating access for countries because it is really, really expensive. And then also trying to make sure that they're accessing it and maximizing the value of what they're getting. So sometimes countries are not really familiar with what the data could be used for and what value does it add, but they still acquire it and pay for it. And so trying to get them to really understand the value of the higher resolution data. The higher resolution data, of course, is useful in other, if you want to use the word, if you want to use the word use cases. So if you're looking at trying to do flash flooding damage or a landslide in a dense forested area, you need the higher resolution data. But you might not necessarily need it for when you're looking at crop conditions monitoring. But you would need it for when you need to do a crop type map if you're looking at agriculture in very, very smallholder, in very, very small areas.
Do you have a use case, or do you take advantage of? You mentioned Sentinel-2, but do you use Sentinel-1 at all for the synthetic aperture radar?
So right now within our group, we have not been working a lot with SAR data. We now have a SAR expert actually who just joined our team, and we're really excited because SAR becomes really critical, especially in areas that are highly cloudy. So a country like Rwanda, for example, you can have the entire growing season, the region is covered in clouds. So the optical data doesn't actually work for looking at how crops are doing. But Canada, who is also a part of the GeoBAM initiative, that is also a part of GEO, the Group on Earth Observations, is one of the leading countries in terms of using radar for agriculture monitoring. And through that, we're trying to look at, what are the essential agricultural variables, where are the data gaps, what data sets will be required. And so in cloudy areas, radar becomes really, really important. Of course, it's also really important for the use case that I mentioned before, flash flooding and landslides. Typically when flash floods happen, it's during the rain season, it's cloudy, you cannot see through the clouds. So oftentimes when a disaster chatter is activated, countries or organizations such as the UN access optical data from MAXA, for example, like WorldView 2. But these data are only useful when they're cloud-free. And so it can be weeks before you get a cloud-free image. And if you're looking at, real-time warning or real-time damage assessment or guiding field operations for where people might be affected, you can't do that if you have to wait for an image for 3-4 weeks. And so radar data become really, really important for that. And so we're really excited that we now have a radar expert who is going to help, particularly in the cases in sub-Saharan Africa. A country like Rwanda is really hard. Sometimes when you're looking at the GLAM system, you can have no data for the whole country for a whole 14-day period. So you just have gray, and then how do you then use that if you're trying to provide continuous monitoring for the whole country?
No, thanks for that. So another thing is, with all this data coming in, I imagine that you're starting to get into machine learning problem sets too, correct?
Yeah. So really, machine learning is enabling the entire EO community to be able to do more things quicker, to leverage this explosion in data. And we have quite a big team that is part of our research and development. And what we're trying to do is bring these machine learning algorithms to implement methodology that's been tested elsewhere and see how it can do within sub-Saharan Africa, for example, where you have mixed fields. The challenge, of course, it becomes a lot more challenging to, for example, develop a crop type map. So you need smarter ways to do it. And one of the challenges we have also is in order to train models, machine learning models, for example, you need field data, and you can only collect so much field data. It's very expensive. It's very hard to do consistently over larger areas. And so machine learning enables you sort of, train the algorithm where you have training data and apply it and sort of get a general overview of what's happening in broader areas. And so we have a lot of work that's ongoing with that. One of our, our machine learning expert used to study Mars, and it's really exciting that she used to look at the surface of Mars and is now pointing her lens back to Earth, and applying the same algorithms and trying to look at textures and shapes on Earth. And she's really excited about it because, she sees the impact of the work, what it means when it comes to making food security decisions. And it's really also critical because the places where people need support of, be it emergency food aid or development planning, this technology hasn't been, leveraged or used to the extent that it can help.
Awesome. So one thing I wanted to ask you was, you mentioned a lot of programs with NASA Harvest, but how many folks are on site with you to help you out with these problems in Africa?
So our Harvest Hub, which is out of the University of Maryland, is, how many are we? I don't know the exact number off the top of my head, but NASA Harvest is Harvest. The broader consortium has over 40 partners. So the partners, when I say partners, it also includes people working in other agencies but are contributing, who are commercial companies or other universities or other researchers. But the hub is a hub. We have, I think there's at least 15 of us. I'm going to say I don't have the exact number off the top of my head. And we have people who are focusing on really improving the crop monitor portals and trying to integrate newer data sets, push through any updates that make it simpler for countries that we're supporting to be able to use them. We have people that are supporting making sure that the GLAM system, which forms this backbone for scalable assessments, is continuously, online. It's active. It is customizable for countries to do work at the different levels and scales that they want to do it. We have R&D that are trying to leverage any new advances in terms of data sets. So if a new system comes on board, are we able to bring our methods to take advantage of the new data? How can we integrate those data into our operational monitoring through the two, crop monitor for AMIS, crop monitor for early warning, but then how much of it can be used in an operational sense? Because all the things that we work on with the countries have to be operational. And operational means that it has to be dependable, it has to be working and functioning, it has to have support to make sure that it's available and accessible at all times with minimal investments, most of the time just having internet access. And then, of course, then there's a lot of the capacity development work, which I spend most of my time doing. So I do a lot of capacity development and then a lot of field data, sort of leading field data collection campaigns and capacity. So being able to, when we have a newer project, how can we leverage whatever resources or tools that are being developed in the project to contribute to the broader objective of supporting the countries that we're supporting, not creating confusion, not bringing new things, but then getting them to take advantage of the newer tools that are coming available.
So with being part of the University of Maryland, do students get involved with this as well as some type of outreach or field research to help with their degree programs?
So we have sometimes, like in my case right now, I'm advising a student for their own master's project. Specifically, it's sort of they send out an email asking for students to get topic ideas that they can apply GIS and remote sensing to an everyday problem and demonstrate its value. So we have those very one-on-one and not consistent type opportunities to get students to work on what we're doing. Also, we have sort of graduate assistantships where we have students who are working in computer science who are very, have programming skills, big brains that they can apply and use their, computer science skills towards sort of the stuff that we're doing, and that's actually proven really useful and positive. And of course, some of our core Harvest Hub members, full-time faculty that are advising students and working with students on their PhDs. For example, one of the core members of the Harvest Hub team is actually a PhD student who's doing a PhD focusing on agriculture monitoring in India. And so there's definitely a lot of opportunities to work with students and for them to be involved in our work, and even more internationally. So through some of the trainings that I do, a lot of times I run into students. We're trying to form relationships with universities that we co-develop projects with, that participate in leading some of the field data collection work. I work that when we're doing work in Tanzania, we work with Sokoine University of Agriculture, and they were able to help lead the field campaigns. They were collecting the drone data. They were developing their own experiments, looking at things like nitrogen treatment. Can you see differences in applications of fertilizer in fields with remote sensing? And they developed these really neat experiments where they were focusing on, small fields. So they were collecting multispectral UAV imagery in the field every week and then analyzing it to show the differences in applications of fertilizer, be it the amount or the type, and what it might mean for yield coming out of that particular field. And it's really interesting. But of course, we're limited in terms of resources because the tools and the learning that has to be done requires investment, be it in terms of time or resources. So in order for those field experiments that I was talking about to be able to work, is that we had a master's, I think, and a PhD student who were funded by our project, but were working at the university. They had access to the data that we were collecting. They had access to us to help, in the technical backstopping and in guiding the research. And that made, like a complete project. But when we don't have a project directly supporting this, it becomes a big challenge because there are more people who are interested and want to work with you. But then, of course, you're limited because you can't provide them the resources that they require to be able to develop their projects fully. And we're trying to come up with smarter ways through having systematic relationships with universities to develop master's programs or joint PhD programs that then university students within the countries that we're supporting are able to tap into the Harvest network, but also faculty at the University of Maryland and their faculty to be engaged and more fully aware of what we're trying to do.
Great. Now, so let's see. One thing I wanted to also ask you was about how you got involved with the program, and what were your roots for getting involved with NASA Harvest and just the level of impact now you're making in Africa?
So I was born and raised in Kampala. Actually, I grew up in Uganda. And I did my undergrad there. And right when I was finishing my undergrad, I had some exposure to GIS and remote sensing, which was really exciting. And we had a computer lab on campus, but with, of course, very minimal resources. Some computers had licenses, others didn't. we had an introductory course to remote sensing and GIS, but not to the level of detail that, of course, you would want, especially because it was just starting. And so I was really interested in advancing my career, but more so to continue my education. And I really wanted to not do it in Uganda because I recognized that I was barely scratching the surface. But then also, I think in the back of my mind, and I realized this a lot later when I was starting my PhD, that I want to be able to access, international education and gain skills and knowledge that then I can apply back home in Uganda to a development problem. And so when I finished my undergrad, I applied to a few programs in the US. My big sister was in New York at the time, and I got into the master's in geography and environment engineering at the Johns Hopkins University. It was really, really exciting. Exciting also because the program that I got into was only 50% tuition remission. So I had to come up with the other 50% in my accommodation. And we didn't have any money. I mean, the only reason why I was able to do my undergrad is because I qualified for a government scholarship. And so it was sort of an exciting time for my family. My mom is like really supportive, and she really wanted me to really do this because I always wanted to study. I always, from when I was a child, I always wanted to study. My other love was badminton, so it was between doing environmental science and sports science. And I was very lucky that I went, for the environmental science program. Of course, that was enabled by that scholarship that I from the Ugandan government. And so it was exciting because I arrived in Maryland. I got my student visa, I arrived in Maryland without a clear plan because, you can't register unless you pay tuition, right? So through these, at the time, there's a big proliferation of these microloaning programs. So through women networks, they could apply for loans. And my mom was part of this. She was just barely getting her business to work well. And so she got a bunch of loans. I think she borrowed money from all her friends. And then through that program, and we're able to pay for the first semester. It was you could do the program in a year and a half or a year or 2 years. It was entirely up to you because once you're registered, you could take as many classes as when you're full-time. The way it worked, which is so fantastic, after I understood how it works, is you could take as many classes as you wanted. And I couldn't believe it, Imagine where you have these online resources, this huge library where you can get anything. Of course, it doesn't make sense to people who have had access to those types of things. But when you're coming from university in Africa, where just having an ArcGIS license at the time was, even today, is it's a miracle. And then having access to research articles, you could just go click download or go to the library and get it. You can get any book you want. It was so exciting. So after I figured out that you can do as many classes as you want, of course I did as many. And I barely got any sleep, also because I was trying to maximize all the money that my mom was basically fundraising from everybody. So I was trying to take as many as possible. I think in my second, so I did my master's in 9 months. In my second semester, I think I took 8 classes. Of the 8, 7 were 3 credit classes, and 1 was a 1 credit class because it was a preparation for university teaching class. And I did just like I did everything from environmental policy to climate change policy to infectious diseases. It was something like introduction to health, something in developing countries. But this was on top of me doing my geography and environmental classes, which were required. And I did some really cool classes. That program sort of, introduced me to like math foundations for decision making, which opened up my mind, of course, in a way that I didn't know at the time. I didn't realize because it was so hard. It was so hard. I remember this class. It was so hard. We're trying to do everything from optimization of energy consumption to, I remember this risk analysis class where some of what we were trying to do is figure out, like, if there's a power out, where's the best place to start to turn the power back on if you were an electric, company. And of course, when I was finishing that program, this was 2009, so 2008, May 2000. I started in August 2008. And then I finished in May 2009. And this is when it was almost impossible to get a job in the US. So I finished my fancy program. I was really excited, but I couldn't even get a job to work for. I basically was technically free labor because after you finish your master's, you can do optional practical training and work for a company and gain some skills before you have to go back. And so I got this permit, but I didn't really have anywhere to work. So I ended up volunteering for the sustainability initiative at the Johns Hopkins University. And then there's a limit to how long I could volunteer. I had to actually get a paid job or leave the country. And this was May. I basically had about until December to actually apply into a PhD program. So I recognize, of course, when I was doing my master's that, oh my God, there's just so much knowledge out there, and there are so many resources, and you could do so many different things. But I still haven't had the opportunity to develop my skills to do something that I can, go directly and apply back home. So I looked for PhD programs that would combine remote sensing and GIS. I knew I wanted to do more of that, do more mapping. One of my favorite classes in my undergrad was, being able to do field work and go out in the field and map. And so I got into the program at Maryland for a PhD in geographical sciences. And that's how I started looking into drought and agriculture monitoring purely. So when I met my PhD advisor, I didn't know at the time that he was my PhD advisor. We had this meet and greet the faculty. I was very shy, of course. I'd only been in the US a year. And the point of meet and greet is so you could talk with the faculty, but I was sort of navigating through the crowd and really avoiding everybody, I think, in some sense. But he came and asked me, he was the chair of the department, and he came and asked me, so tell me about yourself. Of course, they'd gone through all the applications, so he had a slight idea of who everybody was. So I told him, well, I'm from Uganda, and I'm really excited for this program because I feel like I'll have the opportunity to work on a problem back home, and I'm really excited for it. And I'd looked through a bunch of faculty that were working in Africa, applying remote sensing. There was this big group on forest monitoring, which now is even much bigger. It's called the Global Land Lab, if you want to call it. I think it's called the Global Land Lab, and it's led to the development of the Global Forest Watch platform through the development of these forest change products from Landsat data. And so it was really, really exciting, but I didn't know how I was going to approach everything. And so he said to me, it's so funny, he just said, well, you sound interesting. You should come meet me in my office, set up a meeting next week. So I set up a meeting and went to meet him. This is August, I think. August 28th, I think, is when the semester begins. So probably about September when I went to meet him. And so, of course, he told me again, to tell him about myself, and I did. And then he said, how would you like to go to Uganda to do field work? I was like, what? It was amazing. First of all, I had no idea when I'd ever go back home, because I couldn't afford a ticket back home, and I wasn't sure whether I'd be able to get back and everything. But there's that. But then I was getting the opportunity to do what I wanted to do, go home and study and learn all of these things. So over the course of my PhD, I got to do a lot of field work back home, learn actually how to work back home. And that's what I've sort of been developing to build to build the relationships that I've formed with the ministries that we work with in all the different countries, because I have this unique perspective where I've been lucky enough to have access to cutting edge science, cutting edge scientists and tools and methods. I mean, I get to meet like the director of the NASA Applied Sciences program. I get to meet the people who are on the cutting edge of land use land cover change, because I used my graduate assistantship was with the NASA Land Use and Cover Change program. You be in the room with like Jim Tucker. It was like, so like you're getting constantly starstruck, and you're like, oh, I read this name in the paper. How can this guy be in this room? And so building onto that, I was able to do my PhD focusing on northeastern Uganda. I'd never been there before in my life, but I was always excited for adventure, focusing on agriculture and drought. Through GeoGlam enabled me to form a relationship with them in the office of the Prime Minister here, because Uganda at the time was co-chair for GeoGlam. I didn't know anything about that at all. And the co-chair from Uganda, when I came back, my PhD advisor asked me to go meet with them. So I went and met with them, and then I got my footing there. And then we got a funding project from the Gates Foundation, a funded project from the Gates Foundation called STARS, Inspiring a Transformation in Agriculture Through Remote Sensing, with a big focus on Tanzania. So then I started working in Tanzania, and I was really excited to sort of, first of all, go do field work in Tanzania. I love being in the field, and then meeting all these amazing people and understanding the needs and how we can, best contribute. And fast forward, Maryland competitively won the NASA Harvest Consortium. So Harvest is run outside of NASA, specifically to be nimble, to use this word that was used more recently in the meeting that I was in, to be able to deal with different stakeholders and respond to them, and work with them flexibly without all the bureaucracy and all the challenges with working with a U.S. government agency. And that's been really, really fantastic for me. And so I've last year in November, I won this Group on Earth Observations Individual Excellence Award. And it's just basically because of the work that I've been doing, over a long time period. I think people were impressed that I could do so many trainings back to back. Like I used to do, I think at some point they call it a crop monitoring tour or something like that, where I was training. I trained in Uganda, in Kenya, in Rwanda, and then I did a regional training within a 3-week period. I think it was 3 or 4 weeks. And of course, some of the work that I was able to do for my PhD also helped inform this disaster risk financing program that was designed in a way to help the community in northeastern Uganda, my PhD focus area, to be able to access emergency funding to help communities overcome the challenges of when there's a drought. And that was really, really I feel like I should have just retired after that, because the impact was very positive, tangible in and out, that, all the assessments and the analysis and all the data that I've been exposed to and all the tools have sort of directly given back to the community where I was working. There is now interest in developing that into a national level program in Uganda. And actually, Uganda got an award for that program. Also, they got a it's called Earth Observations for SDGs award for integrating Earth observation and decision making, because in 2017, we have this quote from Martin O'Wall, who is the commissioner in the Office of the Prime Minister. He presented about what they've been able to achieve through integration of EO through GeoGlam. And he says that 2017 was the first year that they were able to act proactively. So in 2015, there was an opportunity where we used satellite data to talk about the severity of drought. And this is part of what I was doing in my PhD. And that led to an immediate decision that there's a big problem. We're going to send emergency aid in that region. Fast forward 2 years later, in 2017, there was another drought. And because this DRF, disaster risk financing project, had just started, the country was able to use the disaster risk financing program money to support families to work not in agriculture because crops were failing, but to work on other projects and get some income to overcome, the loss of resources and assets during the drought period. And it's over the 5 years of the project, they've been able to support over 300,000 households. And when you multiply that to the number of people, the average household, it's about 350 times 5 times 6 people over the course of the program. And it's been very positive, and there's strong interest for the country to develop it beyond just that area where it was being developed, but then also trying to integrate more EO into other monitoring, for example, for landslides and flash flooding and forest monitoring. So I'm sort of now connecting forestry agencies to the GLAD lab at Maryland, and there's interest in pollution monitoring, all of these things. So it's been very positive. It's been a very long, but very positive journey, and I was very lucky to have gone down this path and be able to, I think, contribute and work with many, many people around the world and learn from them.
That's amazing. That's once again just how many people you're involved with, the level of impact you're able to make while you're out there. It's incredible what you've been able to accomplish, and especially a short period of time as well. With that said, I think you just opened the door to just tons of topics in the last 50 minutes, but unfortunately we don't have that much time. So I wanted to put that off there. If you have any last plugs that you want to talk about for the program in the last couple minutes here, as we wrap up, what would those be? Any either advice to young folks who want to get involved, or any interesting tidbits about the current projects you're working on you just want to give a quick shout out to, that type of thing?
Wow, I guess I would do all the above.
I know, right?
I guess for young students or researchers or people working in agencies that are interested in working with us, Harvest is, we have a very the director of the Harvest program, Dr. Becker Chef, is really interested in partnerships and leveraging each individual's skills and each individual organization's skills to sort of build this strong community. And so we're open to partner, and we're interested in working with small companies. We're developing applications and that have a lot of potential for helping support agriculture monitoring. In Africa, there's a lot of ongoing initiatives, and we're really, really excited to be able to partner with people, be it on field data collection or applications for sending back information to farmers, for example. And we're really we open. There's information on the NASA Harvest website. You can reach out through, there's a form you can fill out, and they'll direct whatever question anybody has to the right person, and we'll definitely be in touch. In terms of, I guess a shout out is, I'm very fortunate to work in a very accommodating group and team that's very supportive. I'm also a young mother of twins, and it can be impossible, I think, to be able to balance a career and keep growing. And I have to say that after having my sons, well, first of all, I kept it secret because I didn't know what was going to happen. But then after having them, there was this time when I wasn't sure whether I'd be able to manage and get back. And once I gathered brought myself together, I had a very supportive team that was very flexible in terms of my working arrangements. And I think they haven't been disappointed it. But this, I have to say, a big shout out to the NASA Harvest directors, science team, Dr. Chris Justice, who is also my PhD advisor. So it's been very supportive throughout my career as a person. And also, I guess the shout out would be to the GeoGlam community that is trying to synthesize and reduce the noise and the challenges in working in a fast changing community. So EO changes every day. There's so many players coming on the scene, and there's so much funding and resources coming. But unless that is sort of done in a way that is contributing to existing work, it doesn't make sense. It just creates confusion, and the progress that we make is very minimal. And the GeoGlam community is trying to make sure that whatever is coming on board is contributing to a much broader objective, and that we're not straining our end user, but are actually supporting them. There's another point that you said I could talk about, but I don't remember it anymore.
It's all right. Well, like I said, you opened up the door to a lot of different topics during this episode, and I really appreciate you coming on and joining us to talk about the NASA Harvest Africa program. And sometime down the road, I'd like to come back and discuss your projects in more detail, especially since you said you had a lot of visual examples to showcase, and I'd love to go over those in the future. But since we're wrapping up on time, I want to let everybody know that we'll put links to the NASA Harvest program within the show notes. And if you have a preferred contact information, Catherine, for NASA Harvest, please go ahead and send that to me in an email. I'll include that as well. And trying to think if there's anything else. But once again, appreciate your time. And this episode's going to be on a combination of Twitch, YouTube, and multiple podcasting platforms of your choice. The Google Podcasts, Apple Podcasts, Spotify, Radio Public, a bunch of others. You'll be able to, everybody will be able to find us and listen to us. Well, this is Adam Simmons with Project Geospatial with guest Catherine Nakalembe from the NASA Harvest Africa program. And we will talk to you later, and thanks for listening, everybody.
Thanks, Adam. And I should have said a big shout out to you. Thanks for being patient and managing.
No worries. Your pleasure.
With my internet. This is a great initiative. Actually, I was going through some of the things that you have, and I should have said this before. I connect with a bunch of students, and I always send them anything that is useful. And I like the one that you have. You have a whole thing on machine learning, and I always want to send these resources to students that don't have, access to those types of things. Well,
we're going on just a little bit further about plugs there. Actually, what I'm also working on is an educational webpage as well for resources that include open data sources, not just for natural disasters, but any open data sources include, world boundary files, maybe ports, airport shape files, refineries, just openly available data that include imagery that people can access, not just from government sources, but anything that the commercial providers will put out there that's easy to grab, that doesn't require anybody to pay for. So I'm slowly working on that page, but hopefully yourself or others can take advantage of that once I release it in the coming weeks. So,
awesome.
But I'm humbled that you like what I have, and hopefully others, keep us running too. So I appreciate it.
Appreciate it too. Thank you. Thank you so much.